Hey everyone, welcome to Thought Crime and Keto and Crime. Today we are delving into part 1 of the West Memphis 3. Now this one's going to be a very long one for those of you watching on video at YouTube, BitChute, or Library. You're going to probably see this in 2, possibly 3 parts broken up as follows. Today, on part 1, we will cover the victims, background on the town, also the background of the pop culture phenomenon and kind of mores of the time period that we're talking about, as well as what happened on the day of the crime itself. That's where this part will stop. Part 2, we will go into the investigation and the 3 main suspects. And then part 3, if there is a part 3, we may do part 2, is all that together, but most likely there'll be a part 3 where we cover the trial and the aftermath, which included a lot of reinvestigation, a lot of new possible suspects coming forward, and the outcomes of what happened to the 3 original suspects. So there is a lot of material here to cover. That's the reason I'm going to break it up into 2 to 3 more digestible parts rather than giving it all to you in one serving. For those of you on listening to this via podcast, you'll get all the parts together as part of one extended podcast. So let's get into it, shall we? The West Memphis 3, Tragedy in the Heartland. All right. Where did this crime take place? It took place about 15 minutes west of Memphis, Tennessee, in a little town known as West Memphis, Arkansas. For those of you looking here on video, you can see a map of the kind of the Heartland area where this takes place. You can see Memphis, Tennessee here. And then about 15 minutes, that equates to about 20 miles west of Memphis, Tennessee, you will find West Memphis, Arkansas, where this took place. Now, Memphis is a little unusual in that it's actually the city of Memphis. You have Memphis, Tennessee, then it becomes West Memphis, Arkansas, and then it becomes Southland, Mississippi to the south. So it's actually a very unusual city in that it encompasses literally 3 states. So very interesting tidbit about Memphis. I was just in West Memphis, Arkansas over the last weekend performing a comedy show, and I can tell you that West Memphis, Arkansas has not changed much since the 90s when all this took place. Very small, Bible Belt kind of town, not a whole lot there. I literally saw a few fast food restaurants, some truck stops because interstate trucking, as it is along all the I-40 West corridor, is very important to their economy. And not a whole lot going on. There's one elementary school, one high school in the area, and I would say to say that someone is making $12, $13, $14 an hour is good money in West Memphis, Arkansas. Let's just put it this way. It's a very blue-collar, lower income, highly religious, very southern kind of town. And this is where the events of what we're about to talk about take place. Let's talk about the victims of the crimes. This crime is often called the West Memphis murders, the Robin Hood Hills murders, and the case of the West Memphis 3. Unfortunately, the West Memphis 3 that they're referring to are the original suspects in this case, not necessarily the 3 victims. And that's the reason I'm making the victims the focus of this first episode, because I think way too much emphasis is put on the suspects. And there's a big controversy about whether they're guilty or innocent. We will get into that in either part 2 or part 3, but for right now, I want us to focus on the real victims, these 3 innocent little boys that had their lives taken at ages 8 to 9 years old. So let's get into it. The first one we have is Stephen Edward Branch. For those of you on video, you can see him here. He was called Stevie by his family and friends. He was born November 28th, 1984, to Stephen and Pamela Branch. They divorced when he was very young, and she remarried Terry Hobbs and went on to have another daughter, Amanda, with Mr. Hobbs. Stevie was, by all accounts, a heartbreaker. He was blonde hair, blue-eyed, sweet, smart. Like the other two boys, he did well at Weaver Elementary School and was vivacious, loved to skateboard. In fact, his father, on the date that this actually occurred, his stepfather, Terry Hobbs, had already found him riding on his skateboard, belly down. So you had him in a prone plank position on a skateboard going down some of the public streets in West Memphis. Well, his father had warned him many times this was dangerous and he shouldn't do it. So he actually caught him and, gave him the capital punishment swat on the backside and told him to go home. So he loved to do stuff like that, particularly with a skateboard. He also was a Cub Scout like his two other friends, and had advanced to the rank of Grizzly within the Cub Scouts, I believe. So he was on his way up to the higher levels of scouting, which I don't think many of you realize just how hard that is to get into those higher ranks of scouting. You have to be very dedicated to it, and he was. He was very close with his half-sister Amanda, who was a little bit younger than him. He was 9 when this happened. She was 4. Next, you have Christopher Mark Byers, known as Christopher or Chris. He was born June 23rd, 1984. He was the son of Melissa DeFur and Ricky Murray. They divorced when he was 4 years old, and his mother remarried to John Mark Byers, and he also had an older brother, stepbrother by another man, Sean Ryan Clark, and John Mark Byers adopted Chris soon after he married his mom. So he also attended Weaver Elementary. He loved to ride his bike. He was extremely smart, had also advanced to the rank of Grizzly within the Cub Scouts. So Cub Scouting and things like knot tying, camping, playing in the woods, very important to all 3 of these boys. Then you finally have James Michael Moore, known as Michael. He was born July 27th, 1984. He was the son of Todd and Dana Moore. He was basically the leader of this group of friends. What he says went. He was the one that kind of planned out what they did. He wanted to be a police officer. He was very much into scouting. He was also a Grizzly, in the rank of Grizzly within the Cub Scouts. Excelled at camping, excelled at the police codes that the Cub Scouts are taught. He excelled at everything, made straight A's, just a really bright young man. Also, his parents were the only 2 of the victims that their parents were still married to the original parents. The others were step families. Nothing wrong with that. I come from a divorced family as well. It happens. He attended, as I said, Weaver Elementary, did very, very well. And his father, Todd, was the only father that was not in town when this happened. His father was an over-the-road truck driver and was gone. He did not return home until 5 a.m. the day after the events that we're about to talk about took place. So that's important for later when we get into the investigation part. That you remember his father was the only one that was not in town when this happened. Let's talk about May 5th, 1993, the date of these murders. Basically, we know that Stevie, Michael, and Chris went out to play. We know this because to all those that have read the records, we know that the boys got out of school, they went home. Michael and Chris immediately got their bikes and rode over to Stevie's house or to get him to come out and play. While there, one of the other boys, it is reported, one of the other boys, I believe it was Michael, loved the Muppet Babies, and he saw that Stevie's younger sister Amanda was watching the Muppet Babies. So he actually asked to stay and hang out with her and watch the cartoon before he joined the others. And this was collaborated by Stevie's mom, Pam, who did say that she saw both Amanda and Michael Moore watching the Muppet Babies within the living room, and then Michael left shortly afterwards and went after the other boys. Now, There was a lot of people that saw the boys out playing that afternoon. There was a lot of people in their general neighborhood because they all lived within a couple of miles of each other. So there was a lot of people that knew the boys that saw them playing along the roads, also saw them in various people's yards. In fact, a couple of people that were getting ready to either go out to eat that night or to go to church, because it was a Wednesday night, and in the South, Wednesday night is church night through the week. So there was a lot of people that saw them playing in their yards about the time they were leaving for church, and they told them to get out of their yards and go home. Now, it being springtime, it was still fairly long days, so it didn't get dark until about 7:30, 8 at night. So there was still plenty of daylight. I don't want anybody to think these parents were allowing their kids to be out playing in the dark. Now let's talk about the area, and then we'll get back to the events of that day. All right, so for those of you watching on video, you see a map here of the general Robin Hood area of town where this happened. Robin Hood Hills. It was named after both some subdivisions and apartment buildings that were there, as well as just the general area. It was a heavily wooded area along a stretch of a major interstate. And as you can see here, you have the Union 76 truck stop. And here you have the Catfish Island restaurant where Stevie Branch's mom, Pamela Hobbs, was working. And that's very, very important that you remember that, because to kind of confirm the time that that the murders actually happened, it was her going into work and getting off from work that kind of will help us to remember the time that this happened, and went to help establish the time. You also have here a little subdivision of houses. Some of the boys lived here, others lived further away, but these were the houses that a lot of the boys were seen playing around that evening. And a lot of the people that told them to get out of their yards. You also have Mayfair Apartments just up the hill from the subdivision, where one of the suspects that we're going to talk about in part 2 actually lived. And then across from the wooded area where the murders actually took place, this wooded area here, you had the Blue Beacon truck wash. So basically they were playing in this subdivision here. They were seen by several people between, let's say, 5 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. alive in this subdivision. And then they were seen by the final witness that kind of told them to get out of my yard and go home or go play somewhere else, because no one wants the insurance liability, I suspect. They were seen entering what is known as Robin Hood Hills Woods here. And then it is here along this drainage ditch and this pipe that the bodies were later found. So we know that the murder happened somewhere in this area. Also, the bicycles of 2 of the boys, Michael and Chris, were also found, but Stevie's skateboard was nowhere to be seen. So many people suspect that he may have gone with them initially on the skateboard, but then, because his house was the last house that the boys were actually seen in, that they probably told him, hey, you're slowing us down with that skateboard. Just get on the bike with us, right on the handlebars, and we'll get where we're going to go fast. So that probably Stevie was tagging along with one of the others on the bicycle. All right, now let's play out what happened that afternoon. Children got out of school about 3 o'clock. They were all seen at their respective houses just after school. Sorry about that. One of my dogs is laying next to me on the couch, and he is continuously grabbing at my arm. So if the computer shook a little bit, I'm sorry. All right. So they were all seen at their respective homes, and then they were all confirmed by their moms to ask if they could go out and play, which is not unusual. Stevie's mom, Pam Branch, who was home just after school, she had to be at work at the Catfish Island restaurant, the one that I pointed out earlier, about 5 p.m. that night. And she told him, sure, you can go out and play, but be home by 4:30, 4:45, because I have to go to work, and your dad has to take me to work, and we all have to go. So he said, fine. He went out. That's when he immediately got on his skateboard and was seen by Terry Hobbs rolling down public streets on his belly. He was actually caught by Terry Hobbs, his stepfather, swatted across the butt, and told him to go home, clean up the carport, and then he could go out and play. So immediately Pam confirms that she saw her son come back, mess around the carport, probably doing what Terry told him to do, and then she kind of lost sight of him and figured he had finally gone off to meet the other boys. It was about this time that Michael Moore arrived at the Hobbs house and asked to watch an episode of the Muppet Babies, because at that point Pam told him, well, I saw Stevie earlier, but he was outside in the carport, but now he's gone. So Michael's like, okay, I'll catch up with him and Chris, but first can I watch an episode of the Muppet Babies with Amanda? She said yes. So he was there for about 20 minutes watching the Muppet Babies, and then he took off to go find Stevie and Chris. All right. So Pamela says she kind of lost track from that time, and then she looked up. It was 4:30, between 4:30 and 4:45. No sign of Stevie. So she asked Terry, who had just come in, have you seen Stevie? He said no. But we've got to get you to work. There's no need of you being late. I'll take you to work, and then I'll go out and look for him. It's not unusual for him to disappear. He probably just lost track of time. So they get into the car along with Amanda, the younger sister, and she drives Pam to her job at the Catfish Island restaurant. Now, while this is going on, you have the Byers now looking for Chris because they wanted to go out to dinner. Now, John Mark Byers had taken their older son to a court appearance. Now, he was 13, so he must have gotten some juvenile problems. So he had actually driven him to a court appearance that day. When he got home, he asked Chris's mom, hey, let's all go out to eat. Where's Chris? And he said, well, I think he's in his room. So they go check his room. He's not there. So they realized at that point, around 6 p.m. by that time, that their son is missing. And Michael's Moore mother is also wondering where he is because he didn't come home for dinner. Like I said, his father was an over-the-road truck driver who was still out and about on his route, wouldn't be home until the next day. All right, so Terry Hobbs and a friend of his, who we shall talk about later when the suspects come around, after they dropped Pam Hobbs off at her job, they decided they're going to go out and look for Stevie. So they start combing the area looking for him. At one point, around 6:30 p.m., approximately an hour and a half after he dropped his wife off at work, some neighbors in that same subdivision we were talking about saw the boys not only playing in their yards and riding their bikes, but saw Terry Hobbs pull up in a pickup truck yelling for the boys to go home. And they said at that point, they turned and rode their bikes, all three of them. We had two boys on one bike, remember? Rode back toward Terry Hobbs, and that's the last those neighbors saw. And then a little bit later, other neighbors said they didn't see Terry Hobbs, but they saw the boys go into the woods about 6:30. So a lot of conflicting evidence going on here. All right, now let's get into the case of what has come to be known as Mr. Bojangles. I'm going to tell this story because it is pertinent to what happened on that day. This will come back up when we actually talk about suspects, but I think it's important. Just before 8 o'clock on the same night, May 5th, 1993, a 911 call comes into the local police department saying from the local manager of a Bojangles restaurant, which is a fast food chicken restaurant that's pretty popular in certain parts of the South, that they had seen an African-American male come stumbling into the restaurant, pretty disoriented, and obviously covered with blood. He had gone into the women's restroom and stayed there for 20 to 30 minutes. And finally, the manager decided to go in and check on him. Once he went in, the guy exited the bathroom. He had smeared blood all over one of the stalls, around one of the toilets, and the manager asked him, hey, are you okay? Do you need an ambulance? No, I don't need an ambulance. I'm okay. And he actually stumbled out and stumbled through the wooded area near Robin Hood Hills. This restaurant was located near the same area. Stumbled that way out and disappeared. So, of course, the manager goes immediately and calls the police. All right, so the 911 call comes in, and Officer Regina Meeks from the West Memphis Police police department is dispatched to the Bojangles restaurant to talk to the manager about what happened. She arrives at the restaurant at around 8:45, 9 o'clock, and pulls through the drive-through window to take the manager's statement. You can't make this shit up, y'all. I'm surprised she didn't order a 2-piece with a large Sprite while she was sitting there. But she literally pulled through the drive-through and took the manager's statement through the drive-through window. Even the manager, when he testified, and we'll get to that later on in the trial portion, said, hey, don't you want to come inside and look at the bathroom? He left it kind of a mess. There might be some evidence there. And she was like, no, I don't need to do that. She simply took the statement, and he literally told her the guy disappeared not more than 5-8 minutes ago. That way, literally pointed into the wooded area going back towards Robin Hood Hills. She could have literally probably driven along the access road and found this guy and taken him in for questioning. But she didn't bother to do that. She just wrote it up as a mysterious person, closed her report, and took another call about some kids throwing eggs at cars and houses. I guess she thought that was more important. I don't know. But anyway, that's how the whole incident of Mr. Bojangles took place. All right, so switch back now that it's getting closer to 9 o'clock. We arrive back at the Catfish Island restaurant where Pam Hobbs has finished her shift as a server. Terry Hobbs pulls up. Remember, he's been out looking with a friend for Stevie and Michael and Chris. He immediately walks into the restaurant, blows past his wife, goes immediately to the payphone and makes a phone call. Pam said later that she just kind of looked at him like, what? So she just figured, okay, he's an asshole, so I'm just going to go out and talk to the kids. So she goes, she gets some candy out of the gumball machines in the lobby, and she goes out to the truck expecting to see both Stevie and Amanda sitting there, but unfortunately it's only Amanda and Terry's friend, who we will get into, as I said, later. And Amanda said, we can't find Stevie. So she immediately shoots back into the restaurant and asks Terry what the hell's going on, and he says, we can't find Stevie. I'm calling him in as a missing person. So Officer Regina Meeks, the same one that went through the drive-thru at Bojangles, pulls up about 9:15 at the Catfish Island restaurant. I wonder if she had her a meal there too. Actually pulled up, came in, took the missing persons report, and told them that oftentimes these boys turn up, they're just probably out playing, lost track of time, but we'll make note of it. No note was, just like with the Mr. Bojangles incident, no mention was made of actually doing any kind of investigation, any kind of search, what have you. About this time, the Byers have also called in a missing persons on their son Chris, and Regina Meeks also takes that call. Was there any other police officers working that night in West Memphis, Arkansas? Anyway, so she takes that report. Again, no search is done. The parents go out and start searching the area where Chris, Michael, and Stevie were last seen, confirmed by friends and neighbors around the Robin Hood Hills area. They go out and start searching in that area. While they're out there, one of them passes a Memphis, Arkansas police officer who wants to know what's going on. Why are y'all all out here? And he goes, we've got 3 missing boys. And he goes, really? I haven't heard. So did Regina Meeks not even turn in these reports? But anyway, this police officer gets out his flashlight and starts searching the area. They search for several hours until about midnight. They call it and say they will start again in the morning. By this time, they know that there's no chance these boys have just lost track of time. Something is wrong. All right. 8 a.m. that morning. By that time, Michael Moore's dad is back from his truck driving job, and everyone, including his maternal grandfather, who actually gifted him the bike he was last seen riding, are out searching. They're searching around Robin Hood Hills, and by this time the police have finally started an official search. So you've got people out there combing the woods looking for any instances of anything in these woods, and it goes on all day. Finally, around 1:45 p.m., a parole officer by the name of Stephen Jones, who is helping with the search, looks into the water access, the little reservoir that's there in Robin Hood Hills along that pipe, and sees a tennis shoe sticking out of the water. Well, his heart sinks. So he picks the shoe up, hands it to another officer, and says, "I'm going in." He then takes off his shirt and moves into the water to search. This is pretty shallow water, so he's basically crawling along the bottom looking for anything, and he finds the body of Michael Moore. Michael Moore is pretty much stripped. He is quasi-hogtied, meaning that his right arm is bound to his right foot and back of his legs, and the left arm is also bound to the left foot behind the leg. So a reverse hogtie. He is found to have multiple wounds on him, including bites and what looks like mutilations. And Stephen Jones actually lifts his body, places it on the bank, and continues to search. And a few feet up, he finds the bodies of Chris and Stevie as well, tied in the same way with their shoelaces. The bodies were found to be, as I said, hogtied. There was multiple injuries, looks like bites, and the genitals of one of the boys had been completely bitten off or cut off. His entire penis area was mutilated. So these bodies were not in pristine shape. After further searching, they found both of the two bicycles that were there further up the river. And at that time, they actually informed the parents what happened. And I'm going to insert a clip here of Pamela Hobbs, Stevie Branch's mother, finding out that her son is deceased. All of the boys were laid to rest within 6 days. One of them in Missouri, one in Arkansas, one in Tennessee. Excuse me, 2 in Arkansas, 1 in Missouri. As you can imagine, this town went into a huge amount of mourning. Their elementary school, Weaver Elementary, created a memorial for the boys that's still there. And just everyone was outraged and comforting these families, wanting to find out who did this, why they did this, and wanted to see them punished. Remember, this is Southern justice. Think about this. Now, immediately because of the bites and the mutilation to the genital areas of one of the boys, as well as the way they were tied, kind of fit into what was going on in the country at that time. At this time, from the late 70s, when a Christian comedian by the name of Mike Warnke wrote a book in the late 70s called The Satan Seller, where he actually confessed to have been a Satanist high priest, kind of described all these rituals that he did, and actually talked about it in his comedy act, who sold out arenas and churches all over the country. This started officially the Satanic Panic in the United States, even though he was later discredited by a Christian magazine who did an in-depth research on him, found that he had lied about everything. But this set off the Satanic Panic. There was a fear of anything related to the occult. You had a great deal of interest in people like Anton LaVey, who, for those of you on video, he's the gentleman here at the bottom of the page. He is the creator of the original Church of Satan. He wrote the Satanic Bible in 1967. He was a carny. He played the organ in a carnival. He was a lion tamer. He was just a very theatrical person, and since he did some work for the Catholic Church, he saw the hypocrisy that can be in a lot of churches, and he decided to give the middle finger by starting his own church and naming it after Satan, even though he was an atheist and he believed in nothing. He didn't believe in God. He didn't believe in Satan. He just used Satan to kind of give religion the middle finger, and was also very theatrical, so he found it just to be a lot of fun to completely mimic and mock the Catholic Church with doing the exact opposite, calling them black masses and things like that. He opened up his black house in Lower Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, which attracted a lot of interest, and he became sort of a celebrity. So there had always been a lot of interest in his work. Closely tied to him, he was known to be a student of Aleister Crowley, who will also come up in the trial that we're going to cover. He was the creator of the Church of Thelma, which is not really a Satanist church, but it's certainly not a Christian church. It's just a Wiccan kind of alternative spiritual type of church. He wrote the Book of Law. He considered himself, and he's pictured here for those of you on video to the top, he considered himself a god. He talked about the beauty of drinking blood and sacrificing children and animals. That's something LaVey never talked about. In fact, his Satanic Bible actually forbids preying on the innocent. If you've ever read it, I have. He was an atheist, whereas Crowley did really believe in the supernatural. So they were two conflicting philosophies, but they somehow get intermingled. And it was among this that people like Mike Warnke got the idea to write these books and set off a panic. There was a panic about heavy metal music, as some of the heavy metal stars of the 80s and 90s actually were members of the Church of Satan. As I said, they're atheists. So you had the whole phenomenon of playing records backwards, and just the fear of 80s cartoons and how they're tied to satanic. You had the McMartin preschool case, which I will link that video below. I did a video on that. Came out during this time. So you had a world that was on the tail end of this satanic panic. Everything was satanic. Satan was just behind the door. They were going to get you. And the fact that these boys were mutilated and bitten led people to believe that it had to be an occult murder. So that's where we're going to stop on part 1. Part 2, we will get further into the police investigation and the first of several suspects in this crime. Thank you so much. Like, comment, share, subscribe. If you want to support the channel, I've got Cash App and Patreon and PayPal links below. Always appreciated, never required. And if you can't, just give this a like, give me a comment, let me know what you think, give me suggestions for future cases. As always, I love and appreciate everyone that watches my videos. Thank you so much. Keto Comic, out.